Hi there, it's Alexandra from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and today we're going to talk about garden styles. If you are revamping your garden, or if you're starting from scratch, or even if you're just buying something like some new garden furniture, it's hugely helpful to know what garden style you like or want to achieve. You may actually already have a garden style without really being aware of it, in which case check out to see which one of these 12 garden styles is yours. Or you may be looking for inspiration, in which case I hope you'll find it here. Each of the garden styles will be listed in the description below with a timestamp and with other videos that will tell you more about the style in particular, books and other resources. So if you just want to know about one garden style, check out the description below and go straight to it with the timestamp. If you're new here, the Middlesized Garden uploads a video once a week with tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. And if you want to see the videos when you open up YouTube, click the subscribe button. And if you'd like YouTube to tell you when new videos are uploaded, then tap the notification bell. And of course, they're all completely free. The first garden style I want to talk about is cottage garden style. It's really well loved all over the world, and it's really suitable for smaller gardens. Cottage garden style is about the plants. You probably won't have a lawn in a cottage garden, although it's also a no-rule style, so if you want a lawn, have one. But it's really about making the most of your planting space and mixing up flowers and vegetables and fruit. You probably have a fruit tree, at least one, even in the smallest cottage garden. It's full of colour and life. And also, while planting in herbaceous borders and things often has rules like plant in 3s or 5s, in a cottage garden, if someone gives you a plant, you just find a place to wedge it. It's typically about growing the sort of plants that do well in your neighbourhood. They're not difficult, they're not expensive, but they're colourful and they're fun and they're easy. Cottage gardens have pathways and they have terraces and places to sit, and the furniture that they have will be put together. It may be a chair pulled from inside, or it will be something you've picked up in a junk shop, or perhaps in a chain store. It's quite mismatched, it's just casual, it's what's comfortable, it's what you love. And there's a video with more about how to achieve cottage garden style in the description below. The next garden style is what I would call traditional garden style, although that overlaps with quite a few other garden styles. I'd call this garden, the Middlesized Garden, a traditional garden because it has a formal area close to the house. It has a herbaceous border, which is where I do most of my colour planting. It has a wide open lawn and some wilder areas further away, and the practical parts, the veg growing and the sheds, are tucked around out of sight of the house. That's all a very traditional garden layout, and it means the garden is divided up into garden rooms. I particularly enjoyed this traditional garden at the Bath Priory Hotel, which is run by award-winning head gardener Jane Moore. And it's got a beautiful open lawn with herbaceous borders, and then you go through a gateway to a formal sunken garden, and then onto a wilder part, and then to the veg beds. And you can see more of this beautiful garden in the description below. Most traditional gardens have got a formal garden at its heart. And formal garden style is passed on to us from the grand gardens of the past, such as Versailles. But formal garden style translates very well into smaller gardens. It's geometric. Think triangles, circles, squares, rectangles. Think repetition and pairing. Topiary, sculpture, paths. It could have a lawn. It'll probably be a neat square lawn, or it could simply have a terrace or parterre. A formal garden doesn't have a huge amount of colourful flower planting, but that makes it very easy maintenance, and it also looks good all year round. I love this smaller formal garden within Doddington Place Gardens, although the rest of the gardens I would call English country. Now, English country garden style is a very much loved garden style as well, and you don't have to be in England and you don't have to be in the country. You probably do need a bit of space. I don't think it translates well to very small gardens, but it does translate very well to middle-sized gardens. I think if you look at this garden of Paul and Frances Moskowitz, who have an amazing herbaceous border, that has got many of the elements of English country style, and their garden is only about 125 feet long. And that video is in the description below. To find out more about English country garden style, I asked people like the editor of the English Garden magazine and head gardeners who's worked in famous English country gardens. And I visited Doddington Place Garden, which, as I said, is a very good English country garden. So the elements of an English country garden is that it will have wide paths, deep herbaceous borders, often with colour theming. There'll be shrubs, there'll be trees, there'll be focal points, there'll be topiary, there'll be winter interest. Of course, there'll be lawns, but above all, it's the flowers that really make an English country garden. Think about tumbling roses, irises, delphiniums. The furniture will be quite traditional. You'll have traditional benches, and you'll have something like a sundial, arbours, arches. And the English country garden will also often be divided up into rooms. The next garden style is one that is inspired by the architecture of your house. Now, this is more about the hard landscaping than about the plants, because if you have a Victorian house, you won't really want to stick to a Victorian palette for plants, because we've had so many new plants since then, and many of them are more hardy, more resistant to pests and diseases, and give you much more choice. However, when you look at the hard landscaping, at the paths and the terraces, the fences, the walls, the sheds, looking at the architecture of your house for inspiration is a really good place to start. For example, the garden designer Posy Gentles has a tall, thin Victorian house made of yellow brick, and so she has a long, thin, narrow garden, and she's used the same yellow brick for her paths. At the very grandest end, there is a house called the Salutation, which was formerly a hotel, which was designed by the famous architect Edwin Lutyens, and he also designed the garden. And when you look at the paths in the gardens, you can see how well they harmonise with the house. Edwin Lutyens designed one of the most famous garden benches, and of course that is all over the gardens at the Salutation. The next garden style is the outdoor room, often known as urban or city garden style. Some people feel that if you have an outdoor room garden, then you don't prioritise plants. But I would warmly recommend looking at the video below of Dan Cooper's garden. It's got an outdoor kitchen in it, and yet it's abundant with a jungly collection of wonderful plants. Dan runs the Frustrated Gardener blog, and he is a real plantsman. And his advice on putting in an outdoor kitchen is really useful for anyone wanting to treat their garden as an outdoor room. The other thing you can have is fireplaces, such as this fireplace with Charlotte Rose garden. And also furniture there. In an outdoor room, you're probably quite short of space, so furniture has to work really hard. For example, what about raised beds, but with a border that's wide enough for people to perch on if you're having a party? And make sure that benches double up as storage, for example, so you can stow those cushions away easily if there's a downpour. Outdoor room gardens don't have lawns. They'll have decking, or they'll have paving, or possibly gravel, but probably not gravel, because it's not particularly comfortable to be walking in and out of the house when gravel is too close to the house, because you take gravel into your home. The surfaces in outdoor room gardens are often reflected within the house. So if you've got stone flags in your kitchen, you might have a similar stone flags in your garden. Or if you've got wooden boards in your kitchen, you might have decking in the garden. The next garden is contemporary or modern garden style. And I think what really defines contemporary and modern gardens is an innovative use of materials, things like corten steel or gabions. Gabions are cages with rocks in them, and they were originally used in places where you might have a landslide to, for example, to stop earth from falling down a hill, but they're now used in contemporary gardens, for example in this contemporary urban garden designed by garden designer Jane Beadle. And you can see more of that garden in the description below. You'll see a lot of contemporary garden design at the garden shows, and so if you look at Chelsea or Hampton Court, they won't all be contemporary gardens, but you will see a great deal of contemporary garden design and new ideas. And I think the main point about contemporary garden design is that it does bring in new ideas and do things just slightly differently. The next garden style is Mediterranean or dry garden style, which might be called desert garden style in the United States and possibly Australian garden style in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, this garden style starts with the plants. You have got to have drought-tolerant plants. If you have low rainfall, you won't have enough water to water your garden. So a dry garden, Mediterranean garden, Australian garden, doesn't have a lawn, because lawns use up a lot of water or they look very brown. So that'll probably be gravel or shingle and rocks. And the gravel or shingle will act as a mulch to retain water in the soil. Dry gardens tend not to have paths because the gravel, of course, and the plants just tend to sort of weave between each other, and in a sense almost all of it is a path. There's a brilliant dry garden in Essex near me, and it's the Beth Chatto Gardens, and there's a video in the description below with more about how to create a dry garden. But one word of warning, if you have a lot of rainfall, this is not a good garden style for you. Quite closely related to dry gardens and using some of the same plants are coastal gardens. However, some parts of the coast do have quite a lot of rainfall, and what you may be looking for is plants that are wind resistant rather than drought resistant. Once again, this is not really a style that has a lawn, because you'll probably be doing shingle or gravel or something like that, and the plants will be growing directly out of it. But you may also have raised beds, because if you're gardening on the coast where you've perhaps got a very sandy soil, you would want a raised bed which you could fill with proper soil and then grow things like vegetables on it. Perhaps the real distinction between dry garden and coastal garden is that the furniture and the ornaments in a coastal garden will reflect the sea, or they'll give you the impression that they've somehow washed up on the beach. They'll be quite weathered, they'll be quite old. And of course, because coastal communities have often gone through times of poverty, they will in fact have this sense of recycling and upcycling and never throwing anything away and just making it all work for you. I live quite near to Whitstable, which is a village that has some lovely coastal gardens, and they're open once a year for the National Garden Scheme, and you can find out more about that in the description below. And then there's the exotic or jungle garden, the tropical garden. Now, if you live in a temperate climate, you can still have an exotic or a jungle garden. And award-winning head gardener Steve Edney and his partner Lou Dowell have a tropical garden in their garden in Kent near me. Australian TV gardening expert and horticulturalist Stephen Ryan also has an exotic jungle garden in Australia, and in fact he's in a part of Australia which is very temperate. He's near Melbourne, and he defines a jungle garden as being a garden that is it has lots of plants and it has layers. You'll have plants like palm trees or tree ferns at the top layer, and then you'll have underneath those planting and then lower planting. But a jungle garden has very dense planting and it has a lot of leaf contrast. Think about contrasting big leaves like fatsias with smaller leaves. Colours will be quite bright in a jungle garden, but in fact it's not always about the flowers, it's about the wonderful leaves. Steve Edney says a jungle garden definitely needs a greenhouse, because some of the plants are quite tender and will need to be overwintered in a greenhouse. And then in the summer you can spend time in the greenhouse surrounded by your lush foliage. There's a post and a video below in the description below on how to create an exotic garden in a cool climate. Now, there's a garden style which you could call a wildlife garden, and sometimes wildlife gardens do look very wild, and this is very beautiful. But actually all of the garden styles that I've mentioned so far can also be wildlife friendly, and the key is not using chemicals in them, so that you can build up the predator populations and that the birds and the frogs will look after your slugs and snails and aphids. The other three keys to a wildlife garden is that you need food, water and shelter. So in a wildlife garden you need a pond or ponds. You need plants that will provide pollen for pollinators and also seeds and berries for birds in the autumn and winter. And you need shelter, which means evergreen hedges and trees. And also you can, if you're a person who likes the look of piles of leaves and things in the corner of the garden, then you can create shelter by just simply leaving leaves in borders and in the corner of the garden. But if you're a neat freak, you can actually buy bug hotels or make bug hotels, bat boxes and bird houses. And those can look very pretty. There's lots more in the description below about how to create a wildlife garden. Another very distinctive garden style is Japanese garden. And there's a Japanese garden designer who has exhibited at Chelsea several years called Ishihara, and these are of his gardens at Chelsea. So they're a little more crowded than you would expect a Japanese garden to be. In a Japanese garden, what is left out is as important as what is put in, and it's a very carefully thought out form of gardening. Trees are beautifully pruned, and in terms of colour, you might have a blaze of cherry blossom in the spring, and then perhaps some other colour will take over in the summer. But it's also about the textures. Things like moss, algae and lichens are much more important in a Japanese garden than they are in a Western garden. Obviously the furniture and the pergolas and the sheds and things in a Japanese garden will be of a Japanese influence, but you can't create a Japanese garden simply by buying those and putting them into an ordinary Western garden. There's a book in the description below by the very thoughtful, knowledgeable Monty Don called Japanese Gardens, so if you want to know more about this style, then check that out. Let me know if there are any garden styles you think I've left out, and do check the comments below because there may be some good garden styles there you might like. And there's more about garden design on the playlist at the end of this video, and if you'd like more tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden, then do subscribe to the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel, and thank you for watching. Goodbye!